Looking back over the past year and a half, the world has experienced tremendous loss and huge disruption. But the COVID pandemic has also shown the power of human compassion and cooperation, proving that it is possible to tackle and overcome even the most daunting threats. Sweden is a life science nation with a strong tradition, and we address global health challenges linked to aging populations, chronic diseases, and antibiotic resistance, to mention but a few. With me here are representatives for some of the most prominent Swedish companies and the healthcare sector. Let's talk about life science. A very warm welcome now to Anna-Lena Engvall, Nordic President of AstraZeneca, global science biopharmaceutical company. And we all know that AstraZeneca's work with the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine saved millions of lives and is still saving lives during the pandemic. Gustav Salford, CEO of Elekta, today world leaders in precision radiation medicine and cancer care. Zlatko Richter, CEO of Mölnlycke, a market-leading supplier of wound care and surgical products and partners to healthcare professionals around the world. Stefan Grass, Chief Medical Officer and Deputy CEO of Bactiguard, a medical device company using groundbreaking infection prevention technology to reduce the risk of infections and the use of antibiotics. I'd like to start with asking you all on a more personal level how your lives have been affected by the pandemic.
It's a very good question. I mean, everyone's life has been severely affected by the pandemic. For me personally, I have to say, I'm an intensive care physician and I haven't worked almost 10 years in the clinic, but during the first wave, I jumped in and worked at the intensive care unit, COVID, at Karolinska. So that was, for me, a really strong experience to see these extremely sick patients, but also see the power of people uniting, collaborating, and they took people like me that haven't worked for many years. There were radiologists, there were gynecologists. Everyone just helped to do what they could do to save these patients. So that was really strong for me.
I live down in Malmö, very close to the Öresund bridge. I can see it from my house. And suddenly they decided over a few hours that they will close it, So looking into a bridge and you see Copenhagen from Malmö, but you can't go there anymore. So it was kind of a little bit of, I said, panic in the beginning before you knew what will happen, that suddenly things closed down. That was something that was impossible to happen, could never happen just a month or 2 months before that. Suddenly over a week, basically, everything was closed down. And then you have to completely adjust to a new lifestyle, basically, not being able to travel even, stay at home, and all that. So I was lucky because none of my close relatives or myself, we had COVID, many of us, but nobody was really sick. So at the end of the day, it was kind of more this kind of how life was limited, and you have to kind of completely change your mindset overnight, basically, to a new lifestyle.
Because everything was unprecedented.
Absolutely.
Anna-Lena, what about you?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, on a personal level, I joined AstraZeneca 2 weeks before the pandemic. So it was really an experience of being new on the job, in a company, in a pandemic situation. So that was, of course, a challenge both from a leadership perspective as well as personally. But also many colleagues have been severely impacted, and I've been lucky in the situation that haven't had the COVID in the close family. But I struggle when I see my handicapped brothers. I have a brother 21 years younger than I who is dependent of assistance 24/7, living with my parents. And he lives a very small, limited life under normal circumstances. And suddenly, when he couldn't go to his daily activities, he's been bound to my parents' house. And what that has done to him and to my parents, I think they all have aged a lot in this period. So, we've been complaining of not being able to do the things we normally do. But those things for him is like going to the swimming pool. It's quite impactful for him. So my thoughts really go to him and all the others, where it's been so limited, the life.
What about you, Gustav?
No, I agree. The initial uncertainty, you were afraid of this new pandemic. It made the world smaller in all instances and in my life as well. But then, week after week, month after month, coming back and try to realize this energy of doing the best of the situation. for your company, but for patients around the world as well. I think that kind of gave hope throughout the year, or years now almost.
So in Sweden, we are now removing the COVID restrictions, and with a brilliant rollout of the various vaccines and the vaccine programs. As of the beginning of September, almost 40% of the world's population has been fully vaccinated. Anna-Lena first, how would you describe AstraZeneca's journey through this? You were new on the job.
Yeah, it certainly has been a journey where we early on said that we wanted to be part of ending or impacting the pandemic, and that's why we went into the collaboration with Oxford University. And I think by now we can say we did the right thing. We've been delivering 1.3 billion dosages of vaccine to 170 countries around the world. So when we speak about the underserved populations, I think we are also very proud of that the majority of those doses have reached low and mid-income countries.
But still only a couple of percent of the population in developing or poorer countries have received at least one dose. How big is this failure? Because it is a failure, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it shows you the inequality in the world, and it's not only... I mean, we have heard these reports in India, they don't even have oxygen for their patients. And we have seen it, I mean, we have seen it here as well in Sweden. When I was in the hospital, I could see that majority of patients actually came from regions with less socioeconomic standard or less fortunate socioeconomic. So I think this is a failure, failure, let's say, but a really challenge for everyone that has been displayed by the pandemic, I think.
Mm.
I think you can also see that from another angle. I think normally when you need a vaccine, it takes 5 to 10 years to get it all the way out. Here it took less than a year. Yeah. And now, let's say a year and a half after the pandemic came, 40% of everybody are vaccinated. And I think, we have operations, for example, in Malaysia that was really late on the ball, but now only in the last month they vaccinated 500,000 people per day. They went from 10 to 55% double dose or fully vaccinated population in just a month or two. So I think if we have this discussion in 6 months from now, many of those numbers will look much, much better because we're in the middle of really gearing up in those areas as well.
If we talk about the impact the pandemic has had on healthcare, what are the most worrying aspects of that, would you say, Gustav?
I think what I deal with a lot is, of course, cancer care. So the build-up of cancer backlogs around the world is something I'm very concerned with. And that's something we are working a lot with to kind of address and help the healthcare systems to take care of around the world. And it's a big problem in mature markets, but for underserved markets, it's even bigger. And it's linked to the vaccination rates as well and the lockdowns. So that's something we need to address not only in this year, but years to come, actually.
And from your perspective?
I think from my perspective, the scary part is a little bit all the kind of cancelled operations or postponed elective surgeries. Only in Sweden, it's 120,000 plus surgeries that have been postponed the last year. And most of them, or many of them, are more like hip, knee surgeries, etc. And that is older people that somehow, the risk is that they get immobilized. So you don't go to surgery just because it's fun, you need it. Yeah. And if you don't get it, you get immobilized, and then you end up having other consequences, like pressure ulcers, for example. So you have chronic wounds coming out of that. So I think we'll see some of those consequences coming up now. And that is the same in all countries. And right now, we still don't see the elective surgeries coming back to the pre-pandemic levels. It's roughly around 90% of pre-pandemic, and that seems to stay.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one thing, I don't know, the doctors or nurses that have been fighting this disease in the intensive care units many times are the same doctors and nurses that are going to give anesthesia, for instance, or intensive care to the patient operating. So that is really, as you say, Zlatko, that is the challenge. How should we help these people cope and not hit the brick wall? They've been working hard 18 months now, and now they have to take care of all these queues. So
exactly how to support those. And these are professionals that are also, in many cases, traumatized by what they've been through.
Probably, yeah.
We think of chronic diseases like COPD, for instance, where it's not even been possible to test the lung function of the patients because it's not been safe. The backlog of patients that we will see there is like, it's accelerating new technologies, yes, but I think for some of the basic chronic diseases, it's really about making sure that screening programs comes in place again, because we've lost the screening programs, that the regular visits, follow-up visits for COPD, hypertension, and other chronic illnesses, we need to find ways to make sure the healthcare systems restart that, because otherwise we will have a population that is not resilient next time we're hit.
Yeah. No, the balance sheet is not. We haven't seen the balance sheet yet. I mean, we know how many people have died of the virus, but not the effect on everything else apart from the virus. And I mean, that's really.
If we talk a bit about cancer specifically, so the backlog is really daunting, isn't it? People waiting for diagnosis, people waiting for treatment, operations.
Absolutely, and the problem is nobody knows. Because so many patients haven't been diagnosed. They don't know that they have cancer, and when it will be identified, it will be at a later stage. And every year, around 20 million people around the world gets cancer. And 10 million actually dies from cancer. So this is a huge problem, not knowing how many cancer patients there are actually out there today. And that's something we need to solve throughout the next years, to identify them so they get the right treatment.
Is it possible, the way things look today?
Of course it's possible. I mean, I'm optimistic, but it's a lot of work to be done out in healthcare systems. And again, I mean, it's manpower, it's trained professionals, but I also think that technology will have a huge role to play, and digitalization of the processes.
So let's discuss another big global health threat that the World Health Organization has listed as one of the biggest threats, antibiotic resistance. Stefan, how serious is this situation?
This is extremely serious, and you talked about 10 million deaths in cancer, and it's estimated that in 2050 there will be 10 million people dying of antimicrobial resistance. So imagine, I mean, going back to 1920, you remember all these tuberculosis patients sitting on the balcony trying to get fresh air to cure their tuberculosis because there was no antibiotic. I mean, I don't want to have that scenario in the future where pneumonia is a deadly disease again. So that is a really huge challenge for everyone, to reduce the use of antibiotics. That is one thing. To use, hopefully, new technology to prevent infections, because to me that is one of the key learnings, that people, I mean, we can prevent infections. We can work together. We can change our habits to prevent infection, but it's not easy. I mean, there will be 10 million people dying, and all the surgeries. I mean, there is no surgeon in the world that wants to operate if he or she risks a post-operative infection that you can't cure because you don't have antibiotics. So this is really a potential huge threat to humanity, I would say, in the future.
And how big problem is it? Because I've traveled to countries, I've seen countries where you can buy antibiotics over the counter. You don't need a prescription or anything.
Yeah, but I mean, what is driving the antimicrobial resistance is the use of antibiotics. So if you reduce the use of antibiotics, it will be improved. So that is a direct link.
So another challenge is the aging population. Globally, the population over 65 is growing faster than any other great age group. And by 2050, they project that 1 in 6 people in the world will be over 65. It's great news, obviously. What are the challenges?
I think, I mean, with age, a lot of complications comes. I mean, you have cancer, we mentioned that. People get immobilized, you have pressure ulcers. And also, I mean, they need more and more help, basically. And many people at that age also ends up in elderly care. And if you don't have enough people working, you know, there's a challenge to treat them and serve them, basically. So I think that part will drive a lot of technology. And we see that already now. We talk about robots coming in, AI, et cetera, digitalization. So I think that will drive a lot of technology innovations to treat, you know, and maintain the elderly population. And I think we also have kind of a demographic challenge, because especially in the Western world, but also I think in Asia now, you have to kind of have a fertility rate of 2.1. You know, every woman have to carry 2.1 children to sustain the population, which I think is a basic for a healthy long-term society. And in many countries, it's down to 1 now. So we will have a population in 50, 60 years with even more of what you said. I mean, not 1/6, maybe half of the people will be 60 plus. And then that we have to solve by I think, technology challenges, because when you are 80, 90 plus, I mean, suddenly you need support, basically.
And Anna-Lena, age is a factor in chronic diseases, all sorts of things.
Absolutely. So yes, it's a factor in cancer. But if we think of chronic diseases like Alzheimer's, chronic kidney disease, these are diseases that we don't really want to think about, and those will come. The benefit of that we live longer and have the opportunity to be older. So I like to think about late Hans Rosling, who always speak about that the world is becoming a better place, but it comes with a price. So we will be exposed to things that has to do with aging, like more cancer diagnosis, like more chronic diseases. And that will require a healthcare system that sees this investment in health as an investment and not as a cost, because we will need to invest in resilient populations.
But in a way, it's a positive thing as well, because the survival rates has increased so dramatically only the last 50 years. So if you take cancer, the survival rates, 5-year survival rates, has gone from 50% to 70% for all cancer types, enabling people to live longer. But of course, we need to deal with all the challenges that poses on the healthcare systems globally.
Sweden has a proud tradition of groundbreaking scientific discoveries and many commercialized inventions. In what way can innovation create new opportunities? If we look at your individual companies, Gustav, what are you working on right now, Elekta?
Yeah, for us is to give the right type of treatment, the best care to cancer patients. And that's precision medicine, and we call it precision radiation medicine. And we do that by delivering and developing Linac accelerators and a lot of software content to really help the cancer patient throughout the full cancer journey. So that's where we put most of our effort and investments as well going forward.
AstraZeneca, Anna-Lena?
Yeah, I think there's no secret that we have one of the strongest pipeline currently. And we have a commitment to make cancer a chronic disease, meaning that it's either curable or you can live with it, as well as we are working with chronic diseases to make people live well with their chronic disease, like heart failure, chronic kidney disease, and COPD. But that cannot be done in isolation. So if those bold ambitions we can only reach if we collaborate with others. So we, for instance, collaborate with Elekta in a project in Sweden around, which is called Vision Zero Cancer, where we are aiming to make cancer a chronic and curable disease. But we are also having other collaborations ongoing around the world. And one is with London School of Economics, where we are looking at how we together with the healthcare systems can ensure they become more sustainable and resilient. So partnership and collaboration is our way to make a difference.
And will there be a cure for cancer?
Hopefully, yes. But I think cancer is not one disease, it's 1,000. And I think cancer care is a team sport. So, I mean, we are teaming up, there are other companies teaming up in this area to find the right kind of formula to treat cancer with surgery, with pharma, drugs, with radiation therapy. And together, I think we'll find the right way forward for cancer care.
Zlatko, in terms of innovation, what is Mölnlycke working with?
Yeah, I think starting with a key challenge we have today is that if you are a patient today that gets a chronic wound, which is a diabetes foot or foot ulcer or a venous leg ulcer or a pressure ulcer, which is the 3 typical chronic wounds, the likelihood today, if you go to a hospital or primary care facility, that you get the right assessment and treatment to heal the wound as fast as possible is around 30%. So roughly 7 out of 10 patients that come don't get the right treatment. And in our case, the answer is probably not in more technology, partly, but not only. More advanced wound dressings, etc. The problem is that a patient, for example, spends most of his life at home while having the chronic wound because you're not hospitalized. So you need to take a full kind of view on it. And there, dietary comes in, how you live your life, what relatives you have around you, and also the professionalism and understanding in wound care centers. So you don't have that many wound specialists. So I think our innovation will focus more on taking this kind of holistic view and not only, developing new, better products, but also kind of understanding the whole kind of delivery of wound care, which includes what the specialists do, but also technology. So, and there also, I think big data, AI comes in. So if you scan and assess a wound, then you can use big data basically to give guidance on how to treat it as fast as possible. And that's one way to come around. There are millions of healthcare practitioners that don't fully understand how a wound should be treated today, for example.
And Stefan, in terms of infection prevention technology, what are you working on?
It sounds a bit crazy, B&B, but Bactiguard is actually, it's our passion, infection prevention. So 1 out of 10 patients coming to the hospital will get an infection during her or his stay at the hospital. So that's a lot of patients that get disease while treated for other disease. And many of them, about half it's estimated, are caused by medical devices. So we are working on reducing the infections caused by medical devices. I would say healthcare system is maybe 50 years behind aviation. So aviation industry is working very hard with safety. If you go into an airplane and sit in your chair, you really feel comfortable. You know the risk of this plane crashing is extremely low. And if you ask the captain of that airplane, he or she would say, safety is my top concern. And that is one thing that we see in the hospital system is really good at treating, but needs to improve, let's say, preventing. So infection prevention is one of those things. So Bactiguard's, our future vision is actually you step into the hospital with the same confidence as when you step into an airplane, that you feel safe, that everyone is working with safety to make you avoid that infection that is happening now. So.
And when it comes to your specific products, what is your key innovation?
Yeah, so we have constructed a surface coating that you can put on medical device that prevents bacteria and other microbes from attaching to the surface. So reducing the risk of infection. And we currently have urinary catheters, central venous catheters, endotracheal tubes, but also orthopedic implants. But the technology is very versatile, so you could put it basically on other things as well. And I think maybe we can have a discussion afterwards to see if you can put it on dressings or even X-ray machines. I don't know, but that's the beauty of the technology. It's very versatile. So that's also the challenge, of course, because you need to choose which is giving the best benefit for the patients.
I think, just to comment that, I think it's an extremely important area because, I mean, we are involved in we have a surgical area, a lot of surgeries, and a lot of infections are related to surgeries, just as you said, and that's a gigantic challenge because then you come to hospital, you're pretty okay, and then you get the surgery, and then suddenly you're not okay, and you have to be hospitalized because of that, and I think that is a gigantic issue.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's great that we're sitting here because you as you say, you come to surgery, if you want to get fast as possible through that, you don't want an infection or complication after. The same with the cancer therapy. If you have a cancer treatment, you don't want the infection afterwards caused by a central venous catheter because that will delay. And we talked about backlogs before. If you get the smooth flow of patients, then, and if we can help them, I think that is great if we can contribute.
I think we have an opportunity to work with healthcare systems and use artificial intelligence to find algorithms so they can also follow their patients. And I was just meeting one of the regional directors in the Swedish healthcare system the other day, and they are so interested to know what is happening with every patient that comes in, but also to be able to find algorithms that can identify patients at risk for certain diseases, patients that would benefit from specific therapies, but also in order to create a more resilient system that they can actually follow patients that they know will do well on a therapy versus not well. And I see many opportunities for us to further collaborate within those areas to make sure that it's possible to follow our treatments the same way in the systems.
And then we have kind of gone from medicine to precision medicine to personalized medicine. And I think the last step there is, as you say, data and put artificial intelligence on top of that data.
But it sounds incredibly complex. This means enormous amounts of data if you're finding the algorithm and the data sharing and all that. Sounds very, very complex.
I think there are two sides of it. I mean, in our world at least, and I come from that world also from diagnostics, is that to be able to be successful with data or AI, I mean, it's two things. One is that you have a lot of data, of course, quality data. So you need to have, I think every company today are investing into teams that are kind of gathering data. I think very few successful companies don't have that function today. So you have a team that just gathers data, basically. In our case, it's wounds, of course, and then it's other type of data in other companies. The other part that is important is to have kind of global standards, guidelines. You have a reference, you know. In our case, if you have that type of wound in an image, it should be able to annotate or link to that type of standard. And I think that's the other area that is sometimes forgotten, is that you need to have a standard to work against. You need to have the answer or the reference to the... And I think when you have that, then you can achieve a lot, and you can, you know, improve a lot. But that's the work that has to be done. And there it's a lot of... People think when they hear AI, it's like, you know, you automatize and you make your life easy, but it's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to bring together all the data with the guidelines. Yeah.
But when the system is in place, then it's a smorgasbord of opportunities.
Would you say that would revolutionize?
I think it can for sure revolutionize care, it can revolutionize treatment, but also research and development. Because if we can use that as research platforms and get that data in a structurized way, I think that will have a positive impact as well.
And it's also bringing the patient in. So we work a lot with patient-reported outcome, that the patient actually on his iPhone has a connection to the care team at the hospital, collecting all that data, getting it back to the hospitals, and then coming up with even better treatments. So you get that kind of very positive feedback loop throughout the care chain. That's something we want to be part of developing.
And how many years ahead is that?
It's happening now, as I see it. I mean, we're in the starting point, and the positive benefits of it needs to get out to the customers, the hospitals, but also to the patients. But we are there already now.
I think to add to that, I fully agree. But it's a journey, you know. The more data you have, the better it becomes, you know. The more data, the more million images or data you have, the better the outcome becomes, you know. So if we have 1 million images now, we have 10 million in 10 years, you know. That is a journey. It will just continue. So it will be kind of incremental improvement all the time. And then suddenly every 50 years you say, wow, it's a big difference. But it's all these small steps you take all the time. So the more data, the better. So you can just continue to collect data and build, you know, whatever you want to build. You talked about a smorgasbord. And that's basically what it is. You just have to figure out what plates you want to be part of, so to speak.
Yeah, and work also across. I mean, you talk about patient-centric, which is super important, but also supporting the healthcare professionals. So, I mean, we've seen one of the aspects of our area in Bactiguard, infection prevention. That is behavioral change, and we have seen with the COVID that you can change your behavior. Yeah. You can, but it's not easy. I mean, we have all been spending time at New Year's Eve saying that we should stop smoking or whatever, and it doesn't happen after 3 months. We're back again, but the pandemic has showed you can drive behavioral change, and if AI or apps or we have the smartphones or whatever can help healthcare professionals make a good choice of, I mean, therapy, as you say, precision medicine. I think that's the future.
And there's big financial constraints in healthcare systems as well. And if we can help coming up with ways of doing it more efficient, so we can free up the doctor's time, the nurse time to actually take care of the patient rather than filling in forms and so on, that is also a huge benefit.
Yeah. Will this development be more demanding for the patient, for the individual patient?
I don't think so. I think it won't. Longer term, it will not. I think it's like installing a change. I'm also thinking that we, in order to scale and get scale, we need to make sure that data is shareable across borders and across healthcare systems, because then we can create real algorithm and understand what are the benefits for a patient in different situations, as well as from a perspective of developing new therapies. We can already today use registries to test out new indications. So we have a few of those collaborations ongoing in Europe, in Sweden, where we're looking at myocardial infarction on one of our existing products by using a registered data. And that's possible, but that means that you need to have data shared across the different regions in Sweden and with the UK, for instance.
You asked about the patient as well. Is it more difficult for the patient? And I think it's the opposite. Because if you're a cancer patient today, it's almost like a full-time job. You need to keep track of your appointments, what treatments you should get, as so on. But if you get an application on your phone or your computer telling you, guiding you through that journey, and also after the treatment for you to interact with the care team, I think that will enable a better care and also a better outcome, and that's shown in many studies.
But I'm also thinking about, the older population.
Yeah.
So my mum is in her 80s. She doesn't even own a smartphone. How's that? There's a change there as well.
Yeah.
But we don't need to go apps and everything to be innovative. I mean, the pandemic has shown us that we can innovate in other ways as well. I mean, just heard from India, they have a nurse at the ICU going around with a bell one time per hour, reminding people to wash their hands. So, I mean, one thing is apps, but you could probably, I'm not saying I have the solution, but we're four smart people here sitting, and I think you don't have to make it more complicated.
And it's about freeing up time as well. So it's not a solution that's suitable for all, maybe not elderly people. However, you will free up a lot of clinician time to take care of your mother or elderly people, and then maybe younger people would interact through apps.
I agree, and we just made a study at Mölnlycke where we checked, how much of our nurses that deals with wounds, how much administrative time they have, and roughly in their average day life, 8 hours working time, they spend 40% on admin. So that means that's 40% that could be spent on patients if you kind of remove that task. And that is to register, each patient and write down, and that could be automatized. So I don't think, yes, of course, there's always a part of the population, 80 plus, that don't have a smartphone. I think that part of the population will become smaller and smaller, but I think also that you can, take away stuff, take away activities, tasks from the nurses and the physicians, by digitalizing, automatizing, using AI in a very smart way that frees up time that they can spend with their patients.
Yeah, exactly. If that nurse has less time documenting, the nurse can take care of
you
all
get
their
like
patients.
2 nurses for the price of 1 if you can remove the administration, basically. If you take a pure health economics perspective.
But I think there is a point to think of the patient and put ourselves in the shoes of the patient. We've started during last year a patient innovation hub in Gothenburg, where all the different areas of R&D, production and commercial that I represent come together with the aim to innovate with and for patients. So we have a specific part of a building where we are interacting with patients on patient-specific topics. So, for instance, we've tested out the role of wearables, meaning smartwatches, mobile phones, etc., in clinical trials, to see how do patients react to that, the typical patients. Very insightful, because it's not easy. So we need to also be conscious about the needs and how we can match those needs. And for us, this is a great opportunity to do it across our different areas, both for research as well as for the sort of use here and now. But it also is a way for us to get the inputs from others. And in Gothenburg, we are based in what is now becoming a growing health innovation hub with our incubator, as well as an area that's called GoCo Innovation Center, where we would like to collaborate even more with others to actually unlock these things, right?
Yeah.
I think it's super interesting.
No, and I think Sweden is a great hub for that.
Yeah,
I mean,
yes,
with
too.
academia, with
Yeah.
industry, and with the healthcare system to come up with great ideas to bring out to the world.
So Sweden compares well when it comes to cooperation and collaboration, would you say?
Yeah, I think I have experience from southern Sweden, where Ideon, very close to the Lund Institute of Technology. They're kind of next doors, and I think that's the same as GoCo. I mean, I'm spending a lot of time in Gothenburg now, so.
Yeah.
So where you basically, if you're a student, you can do the whole journey into a startup, into a company, you have incubators, you have small companies, big companies, and they're all next doors, and they create kind of this inspirational environment. And it's even companies from different industries, but you have the same kind of high-tech, new innovation type of mentality, and extremely well-educated young people that comes into that, which gives this kind of pioneer feeling, which is really exciting to be part of. And I've seen that in GoCo. I've been a part of the Ideon part in Lund for many years, and I think Uppsala has the same type of
We do a lot in Uppsala and Stockholm as well. And I mean, Elekta, it started from one idea at Karolinska Institute, and that's what became Elekta. So it's finding those ideas and making the most out of them.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, and that's amazing that for companies sitting here with Swedish background and contributing so much in the world. I mean, we talked previously, before this meeting, we talked about some other innovations, but really like pacemakers and coming from Sweden. So this small country, I think that's quite amazing, actually.
Zlatko, what is Mölnlycke doing to make your product smarter? We talked about AI and...
I think it's two areas that we're trying to develop. I think one is around AI. I mean, it's apparently so, in my opinion at least, that if you have a wound and you scan it, you should be able to both assess it better and guide the provider, the nurse or physician to make an optimized treatment that heals the wound faster. So that's our goal, is to heal more wounds faster, basically. So that's core. So there we have AI, big data, and all that. We're spending quite a lot of assets or investments into that. The other big area, I think, is antimicrobial challenges that we have, infections in wound, basically, and what can heal those faster. And there are two areas of that. One is kind of more diagnostics, so you have sensor technology to see the infections, etc. And the other part is, of course, can you add something to the wound dressing that heals the wound faster, some active component. Today, I think it's like, if you go to the hospital, it's like AG silver or honey even that are seen as, those two things that can help out. I think there are many, many molecules in the world that we just have to find and put in there that can make a bigger difference, because we are far from where we should be. And that's still early days. And I meet a lot of scientists. They have this polypeptide that is fantastic, and it works on, preclinical peak tests, basically. But go from there to a human being is probably a 20-year journey, basically. So how can we accelerate that is a key question, because if you can really reach that and put that on a wound, for example, you can heal that faster as well.
Are the processes too slow today in terms of
I think there is a regulatory environment that is tough. I mean, usually when we launch a product, it takes 3 to 4 years if you want to have a global launch, because you have to go, and that's medtech. I think it's even worse in pharma, but you get kind of the CE mark for Europe, and then you get the FDA clearance in US, and then you have to have the Chinese FDA or NMPD or whatever it's called these days to change name. So just those 3 markets can take several years just to get the product out. So you have to have very long cycles, and how to optimize that, not only the innovation part, but the whole regulatory strategy, I think, is key, because that could be as long as developing the product.
And it's not easy for being a small medtech company today, before you've kind of got to this commercial success that I think all us has received as companies. So I think we have a big responsibility as well, as the bigger players in the industry, to help and be part of those journeys, from the lab to the smaller company, through maybe a hub, to a successful exporting company. And I think we have a big role to play there.
On the other hand, I also think that we've shown in the pandemic that we could accelerate the processes. Instead of working sequential, we could work in parallel. Authorities could work in parallel. I think we saw a lot of new ways of working that accelerated the access to medicines. So I think that is a positive thing. At the same time, we need to think about that this is about treatments or procedures for people that are sick. So our responsibility always needs to be the safety. I think that's always, we need to bear that with us when we think about how we can optimize and still maintain a strong focus on safety.
Yeah.
Is that a frustration? You know, seeing how everything came together during the pandemic, and the medical agencies were working 24/7 to approve and to fast track and to trial.
I think it
can be done.
It was it was a really exceptional situation. So I think I don't think anyone wants to go back to day one at phase one of the pandemic, because it also took a lot of effort from a lot of people working very hard. But there is a frustration that, I mean, you need to have a balance between risk-benefit, of course, and the feeling, at least from my side, is that it's going more towards bureaucracy and more towards longer regulatory processes, and many of the products that our companies have available would probably not be available if they were registered today or invented today. So we have to know that, and safety is of course number one, but maybe there is another way of accelerating. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that we can learn from the pandemic still, even if it was extraordinary circumstances. But this on things in parallel, different procedures, instead of having everything ready when you start to interaction with the agencies, I think there are many opportunities.
In August, the IPCC report on climate change concluded that human activities are without doubt causing climate change, and that the negative trend is rapid and in some cases irreversible. But the report also made it clear that there are ways to avoid reaching an even worse outcome if we act now. So what are the biggest challenges regarding sustainability in your different sectors?
There are a lot of challenges. One important aspect, at least in my opinion, is to look at sustainability as a whole. I mean, many of us might be working with products that are disposable products, and sometimes technology can reduce the number of frequencies you need to change things. So you need to look at maybe, focus on the whole life cycle of a product, from where it's produced to the patients and then thrown away. So it's a full perspective on everything, and I think we need to look at all the parts of the chain. And also one very, very obvious thing is transportation, that has now become, is it viable to send products across the globe? We have seen now with all the logistic problems and during the pandemic that we might have to rethink how we do that in the future, I think.
What do you mean in terms of bringing production home?
Maybe bringing production home or closer to the customers, or have multiple sites across the globe, not shipping products across the globe. We have also seen the dependency on one or a few countries in maybe Southeast Asia is very, also from a commercial point of view, quite risky for a company, but definitely from a sustainability point of view.
Yeah, resilience as well. It's not a resilient model that you're so dependent on a couple of hubs around the world. So I think many companies are now rethinking how they set up their supply chains, how they set up their factory networks. And that's happening as we speak.
No, I think, and also sustainability is a broad thing. I think you talk about the holistic view. For me, sustainability is, we operate in many countries, so sustainability is also to make sure that you're compliant, for example, how you do commercial activities. It's also how you treat your co-workers in different countries, and suppliers and sub-suppliers. There are challenges still in many areas. And then you have kind of the whole kind of, call it the green mindset, where you have to look at CO2 emissions, etc. And I think one good comparison is, we just talked about regulatory and quality, how that has changed the last 20 years. And you said even that maybe we wouldn't be able to innovate that much, today, because many of the products that are on the market was innovated before the regulatory came in. But still we do innovation and we launch products. I think sustainability will be the same. We can just expect that the bar will rise a lot the coming years. We are a disposables company to a large degree. We have a lot of plastics. We have also production all over the world that we ship and transport. And I think, one thing with COVID that came up was that shipments are very much more complex and much more expensive now than in the past. And We'll probably see that in the Christmas trade now, where Chinese, e-trade will go down because it's more expensive to ship them here than the product is worth. And the same goes for us. So we need to rethink, just as you said, how should our supply chain look in the future? How should we start to remove plastics? How do we manage CO2 emissions? Do we place a manufacturing unit in a country that don't have green energy for fully renewable energy, for example? So all that is coming into play right now. And I think it's a little bit of a headache because we're not used to those type of questions. It's up on CEO level. We are part of Investor. They ask me every second week, basically, what we do on sustainability. Every board meeting, it's covered as a hot topic, and we just have to address that. We know that in 3 to 5 years, the rules and regulations will be so much different than today. And if you don't act today, several companies will have gigantic problems in 3 to 5 years.
AstraZeneca set out a quite strong ambition already back in 2015 on this. So for us, it's not about thinking about it. It's really what we are doing today. So we have an ambition to be carbon neutral by 2025 and to be carbon negative by 2030. So it's very real work that is happening right now to reduce greenhouse gas, water waste, heating. So we are, for instance, working with our with the suppliers of energy to make sure they are green all the way through. We are working with the very practical things in our labs to make sure we do as few experiments as possible above 90 degrees Celsius. So it's very hands-on here and now. And we are changing our car fleet by 25. We will be full electric, and we actually are doing it as we speak in the countries in Nordic. So it's very present in our business. It's in our scorecard. All of us are measured on it, and this as well, of course, in the board, a strong topic.
And I think this is very encouraging. I mean, we sit here as a life science or a healthcare industry, and before there was so much focus on that, but that's not good enough anymore. You need to include the green processes, the sustainability argumentation as well in everything we do. And we see a good fit between strategy, what we need to do to shrink the access of cancer care around the world, and also about sustainability. It needs to be done in a sustainable way.
Mm-hmm. But you as companies are clued up, and you're on the way, you're on the train, you're discussing these things. What about the consumers, the patients, the people who are taking the medicine? How aware are they?
That's a really good question. And it's actually, when I'm thinking about it, we as consumers, when we go to shop our groceries, at least I look at what is produced in Sweden and then I buy it. But when you're in a hospital, at least in the Nordic countries and many Western countries, there's a huge pressure on prices. So you just take the lowest cost, whatever product, and you give it to the hospitals. So the patients coming in, they don't know this is a very cheap product shipped from across the world. I mean, if the patients would come in and do the same that we do in the supermarket and ask for, could we have a Swedish product, please? And they put like a Swedish flag on the... Then I think that would start driving behavioral change also for the tender organizations and the buyers in the hospital, not only to look at price, because that's what...
But I'm not sure there are any Swedish products anymore,
no,
right?
Maybe,
I'm thinking
right,
in pharma, right? I mean, in pharma, there are very few nations around the world that could produce, that could actually innovate and produce a medicine, sort of the A to Z. I think there are 2 nations in the world that could do that. The rest of us cannot, because we are
like
so
this,
dependent on
like Svanen or
exactly. So it could be an environmental.
Yeah. But I think I mean, many of the tenders that we see today, at least in our surgical area,
starting now.
Is starting. They push for especially kind of green materials, so that you don't have plastics, etc. Yes. And we see that you get the premium position there. And if you cannot address that, or at least show that you have a plan, a concrete plan, you have a problem in some tenders. That I see in Nordics and maybe Benelux, but it's not out there outside still today. But then you see islands. I think in US you can see that. You can see. But it's coming, and one day, once they come, and you have to remember that at least our customers are very seldom private people. It's institutions, hospitals, primary care centers, GPOs, And they will move faster, I think, because their investors will push them to go green or sustainable. And then they will ask us to be that. And you know, that can accelerate very fast.
Yeah. And it's about developing the products as well. So we make quite large medtech products. So it's about electricity consumption. It's about raw materials, design to value, coming up with smarter things of doing it. So having fantastic engineers on those problems is absolutely key. We find them here in Sweden, but also in many other parts of the world, and driving that efficiency.
But I'm just thinking that, of course, environment is essential, but in the end, it's the sustainability of the healthcare systems and the sustainability of our products within that system, whatever the product is. And I think it's interesting now to hear that many more healthcare systems are also interested in how they can reduce their footprint. It's around 4 to 5% of the carbon impact that comes from healthcare. So there is an interest when you speak to leaders of healthcare organizations. They also think a lot about this and how does different products play a role. And for instance, a main aim for them is to keep the patient out of the hospital, because a patient in a hospital by default consumes more of energy, of waste, etc., than a patient that you could stay outside.
So we started this conversation by talking about the pandemic, and we also concluded that we haven't seen the full impact yet, the wave of patients that are yet to come to get the diagnosis and the treatments and all that. Are you optimistic about the future?
I think I'm very optimistic about the future, because I think we learned so much during the last 18 months. We have come together through many countries with the vaccines, but also through many different technologies, being able to treat patients remotely, sometimes even with new technology advances. So I think it's been kind of a bit of a rocket fuel on innovation, COVID, from a positive point of view. And if we can take some of that into the future, I think we can also deal with these backlogs of patients around the world, cancer patients, over the next year, because it will take years. But I'm optimistic.
I'm very optimistic. I think the pandemic has shown and proven to us that collaboration is key for the future, the collaboration between academia, industry, healthcare systems, governments. And we saw that that could happen. And I'm very optimistic that we'll bring that with us in the future as well.
No, I fully, nothing much more to add, but that a lot of increased collaboration is happening in industry. I know that sometimes when you hear politicians in countries, they kind of went to lockdown, close down. I don't think we've ever seen that type of collaboration, because everything had to happen in parallel very fast. And the only way to do that, I think somebody talked about teaming up. You have to work like a team and cross wherever you have the competence, you bring them in and then solve the problem in a very fast way. And that happened thanks to COVID in a sense. Even if some countries closed down, despite that, I think, for example, vaccine came out so much faster than ever before. So I think that we have to bring with us, how you can work much more agile in parallel, etc., and global, to be honest.
I'm looking forward to, like, my mental picture is I check into the hospital with the same feeling when I go to the airplane. Like, this is very safe. We have a good flow through the system, and we don't have the risk of getting an infection or other complications at hospitals. And we, in that way, together with innovation, we can deal with the backlogs and the future challenges of the hospital.
And it is achievable.
It is achievable. And I mean, this is just a start. I mean, we're sitting here for companies, and every company is doing their part, and together with healthcare systems. So I think that's really, I'm optimistic.
Thank you all so much
Thank
for
you.
participating in this conversation. Thank you.